Progressive presents Get Pumped. Inspiration to help you do insurance stuff.
Okay, time out. You're gonna let your budget be the boss of you? Take control with Progressive's Name Your Price tool. Tell us what you want to pay for car insurance, and we'll help you find options that fit your budget. Here's some music to get you pumped. Da-dong, 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 dang, dang. I hear your budget laughing at you. Oh, wait, that's just those kids laughing at me. Ignore them! Da-dong, da-dong,
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
My hip-hop will pop this shot. My hip-hop pop this shot. My hip-hop will pop this shot. Pop this shot.
Really Solomon, yeah, you know me, quote, working from home, unquote, it's easy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome out to the Screaming Boy podcast. We are doing another network exclusive, and I'm very happy to be here with the crew of professional and very adult.
What? You're building us up to something we aren't, Ronnie.
Yeah, I was basically doing that. Yeah, except for Al. I mean, he's been awesome.
Yeah.
But no, I'm here with three goofballs and Al, and
I must be sick then.
Huh?
Nothing. Go on. Sorry, go on.
Oh dear Lord, here it goes. It's already gone off the rails. The wheels have fallen completely off. But we are here to. It's a bit of a sullen episode because unless you've been hiding under a rock for the past week, as we're recording this, you may have heard about the passing of Stan Lee. Stan Lee, I don't even want to explain who Stan Lee is, because if you're listening to this podcast or any other podcasts we're all on, you know who Stan Lee is or was, and we as a collective group of, and I use this word lovingly, not derogatorily, as a collective group of nerds and comic book fans and just fans in general, we're here to celebrate the life and the work of Stan Lee. So speaking of which, as I said, I have four guests, I have a regular panel and a special guest tonight. So starting off with we'll call him the patriarch of the Radulich Broadcasting Network. We have one, Mr. Mark Radulich. How are you doing, Mr. Mark?
I am doing fine, sir. Thanks for having me on to talk about the life and times of one Stan Lee.
No, thank you for being here. Over in the other corner, we have just, a genius in his own right, and always love having him on the show. Totally 80s Pat Mullen. Pat, how's it going?
That's the first time I've ever been called a genius and not being referenced to Lanny Poffo. So on a somewhat solemn show, that's an uptick.
You missed his other nickname, Mr. Toxic Masculinity.
I find that as a badge of honor. In the other corner, we have no stranger to the Scream Boy podcast, of course, and the host of Source Material on the Radulich Broadcasting Network. We have Jesse Starcher. Jesse, how's it going tonight?
Tremendous. I'm glad to be here and to be able to talk amongst my good podcast brethren on one of the most, I would want to say it's untimely, but my goodness, this man lived a life. Yes. So, Stan Lee, it's going to be an interesting discussion tonight.
Yes. And now, on to our special guest in the center of the room, where everyone is staring at him. We have, from Resurrections, an Adam Warlock and Thanos podcast, Al Sedano. Thank you, Al, for being on the show tonight. I'm so glad you're here. I had the pleasure of being on Source Material with you recently, where we talked about the first 5 issues of the Hawkeye solo series. How's it going tonight?
It's good. Thank you for having me on. Stan deserves to be talked about, and I think Stan would appreciate being talked about. Although, standing here in the middle of the room, starting to wonder, am I wearing pants? Because everyone's staring.
And that you are not, and that is why everyone is staring.
Oh, okay, good. I just want to make sure.
Yeah. So, well, let's just get it going. Stan Lee. Oh my God, Stan Lee's born Stanley Martin Lever on December 28th, 1922. American comic book writer, editor, and publisher. Active in the 40s to the 2010s. He started off low in the ranks in a family-run business to become Marvel Comics' primary creative leader for 20 years. Then, which led to the expansion from a small division of publishing house to a multimedia corporation with movies, animated features, toys, the whole nine. So this man has got a lot of things under his belt, creatively. He was born in New York City in Manhattan in 1922. So he, like Jesse said, he lived a life. He, reaching to 2018, almost 96 years old. He passed away at 95. There's so many things I want to say about Stan Lee, and I'll be honest, I'm just a tick emotional about this because this man was a large part of my childhood, and I'm not even kidding when I say that, because of Marvel Comics, because of the cartoons I watched and everything else. Everybody, if you know anything, I'm kind of been reading a little bit from the wiki. When I say a little bit, directly from. But he influenced a lot of people throughout his life, and I dare say that he greatly influenced each of us, because here we are doing pop culture, comic book, and if you're Mark, you've got your hands on your fingers in every pie available as far as podcasts go. We do podcasts about all of this, so it would be really odd if one of us hadn't heard or been influenced by Stan Lee. But he was actually influenced by books and movies, but particularly Errol Flynn within the heroic roles that he was in. So he actually went through, he was in the Army for a while, a World War II veteran, and then went on to become, the comic powerhouse that he was. Worked his way through the ranks. So I'm just going to ask a real simple question to start it off, and actually we'll start with the guest, Al. When did you first become familiar with who Stan Lee was? When did you realize that, oh my gosh, this is the man behind Spider-Man, Hulk, Iron Man, Thor, all these characters?
Probably my first knowledge of him, which was growing up as a kid, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. He would introduce it all, that, and there was a Hulk show at the same time too for a while, and he introduced both of them. And so the first thing you heard was, "This is Stan Lee, true believer." I think I'm in the same boat with you as I think I knew his voice before I knew what he looked like. Yeah. So that's fantastic. If do you have anything else that you want to add to that, or? No, that's the first thing. Because when I went to reading comics, I just recognized the name, like, oh, that's the same guy. Yeah. And then you just keep exploring further and further.
Yeah. Mark, what about you?
Probably the same. I have to imagine I was watching the cartoons before I ever picked up the comics. Comics would come later. So I probably knew Stan Lee as the voice of the Hulk cartoon and Spider-Man and all that. And then obviously he started showing up when Marvel sold its movie rights to Sony and Fox. He started showing up in those movies. I'm trying to figure out if he was showing up in stuff earlier than that. Pat would probably know. But I do remember him making appearances here and there and getting his face out there.
Jesse?
Well, it's tough to say, to be honest, because I remember as a kid getting my hands on my first ever Spider-Man comic, which would probably put it around early 80s, I would say. And I was able to read, but I really hardly ever paid attention to the creators of whoever I was reading on the page. I was just, hey, that's Spider-Man, and hey, that's the Punisher. So who Stan Lee was, my guess is at some point I was like, okay, who is this Stan Lee character? Oh, he's the guy behind Marvel Comics. And that's pretty much what almost every Marvel comic you saw, Stan Lee presents. So me reading that name over and over and over, it became like a household name, and somebody that, okay, well, there's a Marvel comic, Stan Lee, immediately right into my mind. Now, when that happened, when I started associating that, most likely it's just because I read it so many times throughout the years. But I never really like dove into the history of this man. His name continually popped up, especially here lately, and all the troubles that he was going through. But I wasn't like I was somebody that followed his legacy. But when I first heard of him, man, my guess is it had to have been the early 80s as a kid, and it was just one of those things where, like, his name became synonymous with Marvel Comics from that point forward for me.
Pat, what about you?
So I basically got indoctrinated into reading comic books before I could even read. I knew the pictures, I knew the characters, even if I didn't know the stories. And majority of what I was fed, for lack of a better word, were Marvel characters, and the traditional Marvel characters. It was Captain America, it was Thor, it was Iron Man, it was Spider-Man, it was the Hulk, and I would always get told about how they all came from, for the most part, they all came from the mind of this, incredibly creative man, Stan Lee. And the first time I was able to put, a face to the name was, at times you'd see almost like a caricature of Stan in the back of the comics when you'd have Stan's soapbox where he'd answer questions.
Yeah.
And then, in the 80s, when Marvel started releasing a lot of home videos of the cartoon properties they had, and almost kind of like how the guys talked about before, where you would hear his voice do narrations on the home videos of a lot of the 60s re-releases, which were basically comic panels with sound. He would do actually a live action introduction for a lot of them. And that was the first time I ever saw him and put a face and an actual identity to this, incredible mind.
To this day, I still remember a lot of those 60s themes, especially the Captain America one. I could burst into that 60s Captain America theme right now.
Yeah, I forgot what you said about home video. That's right, because they also had, because I think the first time I actually saw him, like you said, those home videos, a friend of mine had the How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way videotape with him and John Buscema on it.
Yeah.
I remember watching that a bunch of times as like in junior high.
Well, if we look back a little bit on Stan's career, he became an assistant at Timely Comics in 1939. And by the 60s, it would evolve into Marvel Comics. But during that day, he had, kind of a gopher role. Go for this, go for that. He had to make sure the ink wells were filled because they dipped the pen in ink. So he had to make sure that each of the wells were filled with ink. And then he got lunch. He did proofreading. He erased the pencils from the finished pages. And then he always wanted to be a writer, but he made his first comic book debut with a text filler, Captain America Foils the Traitor's Revenge, in Captain America Comics #3 in 1941. And that's when he went from Stanley Lieber to Stan Lee as a pseudonym. And then he would later on legally become Stan Lee. He explained, like, if you read his autobiography, he said that he used a pseudonym because of the low social status of comic books. And he was embarrassed that he used Stan Lee as a pen name. And then from there, he just adopted it as his name. So because, as you go on, I mean, comic books, they were, my grandmother, up until she passed away, still called them funny books. And funny, you reading them funny books? No, I'm reading comic books. Because they're not, Little Lulu and
Casper. Yeah.
Casper. But also, what's interesting, the initial story that he wrote was the first time that Captain America tossed his shield and ricocheted.
Oh.
So he is actually responsible for making the Captain America shield what it is, bouncing off the walls and coming back.
It's interesting that, he gets his start. He's doing this profession as a comic book writer. And you kind of hit something that really speaks to a personal spot in my life, and I've mentioned it on my show a couple times. But funny books, the comics were not looked at as an important medium for a really long time, especially, it's definitely not looked at as a career choice that a lot of people should have went into, especially back in those early days.
Yeah, not until the launch of the quote-unquote graphic novel.
Yeah. I remember sitting there in my bedroom in the 90s, and my stepdad would come down, and boy, would he give me a hard time about reading comics. And, he would come over, grab a comic, and just kind of bend it a little bit. And, here I am, the speculator, and me's yelling at him, put it down, put it back in the sleeve. But, they didn't, shut up, Mark. They didn't know. They didn't know.
Dad, you're bending it.
That's me.
Dad, the words on your hands will ruin the pages.
I took a swing at a girl on the school bus who was a bus monitor for pointing out that my comic had inappropriate content on it because she thought there was a cigarette ad in it, when in reality it was an ad for football cards. So she used a pen to point at the ad on the book, and I took a swing at her.
Don't even.
Did you connect?
I did not, because somebody grabbed her.
Is that why you went into boxing? Well, so the next time you took a swing at a girl, you'd actually fucking hit her in the chin?
No, that's why I went to alcoholism.
Oh, okay.
Oh, geez.
So
reasonable.
So anyway, yeah, that takes a big leap, especially in a day and age back in the 40s and the 50s when, comics were nowhere near as big as they are now. And today, in this day and age, 2018, comics are definitely looked at in a different light. They're well more respected than they were just 20 years ago. I couldn't even imagine close to 80 years ago. Go ahead.
So it's like we're hearing talk. The conversation sort of drifting into the disrespect comic books have, and of course they would once they started being made into movies and those movies started making billions of dollars, things changed. Let's be honest here. But I can remember, like, my dad is the one that got me into comics. My dad taking me to the comic book store. It was something between us that we shared. But this is the same guy who caught me watching the Dukes of Hazzard and said, "I have no son."
What?
What are you watching a bunch of hillbillies for in New York? That's not acceptable.
Oh, shut up. The Dukes of Hazzard was fantastic. But yeah, he had wondered what he had done wrong as a father, that I would be watching the Dukes of Hazzard. My dad's quite a card.
Previous guest on the Source Material podcast, Christopher Radelich. You can go back in the archive. The man judge us comic nerds. Pitch him some DC Warner Brothers. DC. What was DC Hanna-Barbera? But so okay, I guess back to my point was what I just wanted to get out there was that it took a lot for Stan Lee to get into this industry and turn it into what it is today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, although Stan was making it not as big, but much more maybe not acceptable, but popular back then because he had a lot of celebrities that were into Marvel in the '60s. I mean, Bowie was into it because he was going to be. I think it was Bowie that was going to be Daredevil.
Oh, really?
Way back. I think it's Bowie. I know at least McCartney was into it. I mean, hell, he has a song, Magneto and the Titanium Man.
Yeah, McCartney.
If David Bowie was going to be Daredevil, he has to do it in his Labyrinth costume. Just paint it red.
And I know he had the filmmaker Federico Fellini came to talk to him. So while it wasn't the big mass of people that knew now, Stan Lee started that. I think was a big part of starting that because he got a lot of the artistic Hollywood people and music people into his comics.
Literally in the form of Kiss.
Yes, literally. Yeah, literally.
Gene Simmons' outfits were inspired by Black Bolt of the Inhumans.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Look at what he did. We've got the Marvel Revolution. In the 50s, late 50s, early 60s. He wanted to. He was supposed to come up with a new superhero team, and his wife suggested they experiment with stories he preferred, since he was taking this path. So taking that advice, he started making superheroes as flawed humanity, instead of Superman, the big blue Boy Scout, they were, perfect people with no serious lasting problems. So he started creating more complex characters with, bad tempers, who were sad, who were vain, and fought with each other and worried about paying bills and impressing girlfriends and things like that. And then we look at it, and the very first team that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created together was Marvel's first family, the Fantastic Four. And so you look at that, and that's actually, that embodies what he was doing. I mean, they were a normal group of people that, were bestowed, fantastic, pardon the pun, powers, but they were still dealing with what they had. Because, I mean, look at the struggle that Ben Grimm went through. He was, what in God's name did you just share?
Is this Bowie?
Yeah, that's from the thing.
Wow.
No kidding.
That was him and his wife.
That was terrifying. But yeah, wow. I mean, you look at the struggles that they went through, and then you look at all the characters that Kirby and Lee created together was Hulk, Thor, and Iron Man, and the X-Men. And then he and Bill Everett created let's see,
Daredevil.
So, yeah, Daredevil, and Steve Ditko, Doctor Strange, and Spider-Man. So I mean, you look at all of these characters. Iron Man was alcoholic. X-Men, I mean, gosh, look, they were a dumpster fire most times. They were fighting it with each other and everything. Daredevil, he was blind. Doctor Strange, his hands were taken away from him. Spider-Man lived with more guilt than a Baptist and a Catholic put together. And then, of course, you've got the Hulk and Thor and all these complex characters that had, real problems. And then he put them together and created the Avengers. He and Kirby put them together, created the Avengers, and then revived the characters, revived Submariner and Captain America, and started bringing those back and giving them the same characteristics and problems and everything that they created with these other with these other comic book characters. Looking at everything that he had his hands in, that he created, I know Jesse's answer, so I'm just going to go to him first. Jesse, what's your favorite Stan Lee creation?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I mean, he created, according to this wiki, which, okay, look, we're going to step back and we're just going to say, okay, the Wikipedia can potentially be wrong. All right. And
just say Stripperella. Let's get on with it.
Yeah. 362 total characters created by Stan Lee.
Yeah.
I mean, wow, that is just amazing. If you go through, I mean, just half of them, there is going to be, it'd take you at least 10 minutes to talk about some of the more important ones in that first half. But easily for me, it's going to be Spider-Man.
That's what I was looking for.
Yeah. Well, I was going to get there. Don't you worry. But for me, it's Spider-Man. Man, I am in the process. One of the things that I said I was going to do when my second son was born in 2010, I said, I'm going to start collecting comics again. Now, I was still reading, going to the library, picking up comics and bringing them back home and reading them, but I hadn't bought a comic steadily for quite a while. And at that point, I had to make a decision. What comic am I going to get Caleb? Well, if you look on the racks today, you can find character upon character upon character that's their series may have ended after 20 issues. But if you looked at The Amazing Spider-Man, that was a series that had continued from, day one. Now, granted, it had its iterations. We had plenty of spin-offs, adjective lists, and all that great stuff. But The Amazing Spider-Man was one that I thought if I could put together a Holy Grail for my son, it's going to not Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It would be... I shoehorned it in there.
Yes, you did.
You got it.
But I would, it was going to be a run of Amazing Spider-Man. And from that day forth, Amazing Spider-Man was on my pull list at the comic shop, and it still is to this day. And when Caleb turns 18, I'm going to say, here you go, son. Here's your, here's your inheritance. Do as you wish. I really hope in my heart of hearts that he says, okay, Dad, I'm going to continue the tradition and continue to collect, because I think Spider-Man's going to be around for ages. And that is probably
when he says, "Why aren't these on a Kindle or something like that?" What are you gonna do then?
After you hit him,
square in the balls. You're no son of mine. But no, I would, I would hope that he would continue to collect and appreciate what gift Stan Lee had given us in Spider-Man and this character. There's so much that this character has gone throughout its years, and I've working on trying to get some of those previous issues, but it gets expensive. It gets expensive as you go back further and further. But yeah, there you go. Spider-Man. There's my answer.
Amazing Spider-Man is almost like a comfort to me because it's always been there, and I'm still collecting Amazing to this day.
Yeah.
So, Mark, what about you? Your favorite Stan Lee creation?
Oh, that's obvious. It's the Hulk.
Yeah.
No, I would say between the Hulk and the Fantastic Four, it's probably a tie. I used to love the Fantastic Four. I think it was the first comic I started collecting even before the Hulk. Like the Hulk was the character I knew from TV, the Lou Ferrigno show. Yeah. Believe it or not.
Oh yeah.
I was a huge fan of that show growing up as a kid, like that and the A-Team, which I realize is not a Marvel show, but might as well have been. Jesus.
Marvel did a couple issues of A-Team.
They did. I think I have all three.
There you go. But I knew the Hulk from I had some LPs of like Hulk stories that were read on vinyl, and then
Marvel read-alongs.
Yeah.
The Power Records. Yeah.
Yeah. One I remember correctly where Banner transforms into the Hulk, and whoever they had voicing the Hulk screaming scared me half to fucking death. It wasn't a growl. It was I thought something was coming to get me. That's how bad that scream was.
I'm going to admit something, and it stays now on the internet. When I was a kid and I watched The Incredible Hulk as a TV show, and I was young, the transformation scared me so bad I would run and hide behind the couch every time.
I could see that. I mean, it's a bit much for if you're a little kid, especially back in the late 70s, early 80s. Well, that's a whole other podcast, sir, and I'll be charging you for that one. So yeah, I mean, I knew the Hulk was a TV character. I would say, as far as my first like collecting of comics that were Stan Lee creations, it was definitely the Fantastic Four. I loved the Fantastic Four as a kid. I enjoyed that family dynamic. I liked, having my father's a huge fan of science fiction. I grew up with a library. We had a room, gentlemen, that was just dedicated to books. We had a library in our home.
Wow.
Calm down, Belle and Beauty and the Beast.
So yeah, suddenly I'm from fucking out east, like grew up in Uniondale.
No, but see, she didn't have a room like that. She just took books from the library and never brought them back. So really, she's just a terrible person.
But no, we had a room where we just had an entire a huge ass wall to wall library of science fiction books. So that's what I grew up with. That's one of those things that bonded me and my dad together. I grew up on the Flash Gordon movies and all of that. So the connection here is all of those things were in the Fantastic Four comic. It was science fiction, it was fantasy, it was family. I enjoyed the arc of Sue Richards, being this really meek woman who was just sort of ascribed superpowers and her coming into her own as a powerful superhero. I enjoyed, I loved the am I a man or a monster conflict within the Thing, to the point that I would read a lot of anything that had the Thing in it, his solo book or the Marvel team ups or whatever. I went after a lot of the stuff having to do with the Thing because I liked that idea of him having to, to live with this condition, and him just wanting his humanity. I loved his relationship with Alicia, the blind woman who saw his heart and not his condition. And fuck Johnny Storm. I mean, you're blonde, you're hot, and you have fire powers. Fuck you. But and then again, I used to love the give and take between Reed and the Thing, where Reed would go on these long explanations, and the Thing would be like, "Can't you find a shorter way of saying what it is we need to do?" And then he'd yell, "It's clobbering time," and CM Punk would quit the WWE, and we'd be off.
Wait a second.
That don't fit.
You gotta keep up with me, guys. But no, I would say my favorite was the Fantastic Four early on.
Jesse, or not Jesse, Pat.
Spider-Man. Sorry.
I think it's pretty well known that my favorite character has always been the Mighty Thor. And in part because I was so, entrenched in it when I was young and kind of force-fed Thor. But at the same time, when I matured into my own reader, I love the duality of the Thor and Don Blake personas and how you could be almighty in one and just the crippled man on the other side who had a more sure-footed way of doing things in certain respects than Thor did, and vice versa in certain instances where Thor would ask questions that maybe were less arrogant than those Blake would ask. It was a really interesting duality to see that take place in the form of a god and a perceived to be lame man, especially when they really fleshed them out as different personalities occupying the same body. But much in the same vein as Mark, I've always felt that the greatest written comics ever were the Lee Kirby era Fantastic Four books, and I'll put them up against any piece of literature ever because of the just incredible storytelling and visuals that went with them. It was the perfect marriage of not just characters and this familial relationship between them, where it had the sci-fi exploration type Star Trek almost kind of thing, where they were really more explorers than superheroes. But when the time came and they needed to step up and be heroes, they were. I think Reed Richards is probably the greatest hero in the history of the Marvel Universe. And they've also got the greatest villain with them, and Doom is opposing them. But to see all those elements and then to have each member of the team represent one of the core four elements of air, fire, water, and earth, the way they all tied together with the personalities involved, it's just incredible crafting still to this day. I can go back and read any of those issues. And even some of the better runs later on, like John Byrne had, they don't measure up.
Very good. Al.
Ravage 2099, of course.
Oh, well,
boy.
That's the show, ladies and gentlemen. Good night.
No. I mean, there's a lot. Of course, there's a lot of the Stan Lee characters you're gonna love. For me, though, I was thinking about it. I mean, yeah, I love like Hulk or Black Panther or Adam Warlock, but I'd rather read them, though. No offense to Stan, by Peter David, Christopher Priest, and
Jim Starlin.
Jim Starlin. Thank you. How did I lose that name? Go figure. But if we're talking ones that when Stan's writing them, it's a toss-up definitely between two: Spider-Man and The Thing. Though, I mean, for one thing, that run that he did, especially with Romita on Spider-Man back in the late 60s, is still my favorite run of Spider-Man ever. From like issue 40 till like 90, almost 100.
Very cool.
His voice of Spider-Man and the supporting characters was perfect.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, for The Thing at the time, taking the monster and showing how, not just the humor, but just showing how, because he was a monster, forcing Ben's humanity to come out even more than it probably would have if he was human, to make him like a better person than he would have been. But of course, still one of the funniest.
And to be fair, a lot of the thing is based off of Jack Kirby's personality and his growing ups and his relations.
Oh yeah, it's definitely almost like it's Stanley's love letter to Jack Kirby is The Thing.
Yeah,
it's like, this is how awesome Jack is.
It's funny I'll bring that up. Did you know that they had a rough patch in their first?
Oh yeah.
It actually led to a creation of a character when Kirby was working at DC called Funky Flashman.
Yep.
That was drawn like
Mr. Miracle.
Yeah.
If you guys actually, and I'm sure there's still the audio files up. They hadn't spoken in almost 20 years at this point when they did this interview on a radio show here in New York, and it was I think it was August 29th, 1987, where they actually had both of them on this radio show, kind of not knowing it, and it starts fairly civil, and they give each other credit for the partnership that they had, but then they start digging in. It's worth listening to.
Oh, wow.
That makes sense. I mean, well, I knew about that anyway, but yeah, I mean, it makes sense to think about time-wise, because when Kirby went back to Marvel, that was at the same time Stan was not at Marvel.
Yeah.
When he was doing 2001 and Double Dinosaur and the Eternals and Captain America, Stan was out in Hollywood up at that point, I believe.
Yeah, he was finalizing the deals for all the TV shows and potential movie properties when they were doing Marvel Entertainment Group, forming that.
Although irony is, Kirby lived in California at that time, so they were in the same coat. They were physically closer to each other than they probably were when Kirby was living in California and Stanley was in New York.
Well, see, when I say that I gather, experts on the topic, I really do, because you guys are like, I had no clue where Kirby lived. What the heck? I mean, that's incredible. With me, it would have to be a toss up between
The X-Men and Spider-Man, more leaning towards Spider-Man. I've always loved Spider-Man because of this guy is overlooked by a lot of people not comic book readers, but in written word as one of the greatest superheroes of all time. And he doesn't realize it, and he has the weight of the world on his shoulders because of something that Uncle Ben said to him at one time before Uncle Ben died. With great power comes great responsibility, and there was a really funny moment in the recent issue. I think it's issue number 3 of the new Fantastic Four run, where they're fighting. I can't remember the name of the villain, but the villain can't be beaten. Reed, Sue, and the Future Foundation are facing this villain, and Reed decides, I can't beat him, so you're going to face the entire Fantastic Four. So he brings everybody that was part of the Fantastic Four at one time, everybody to this realm, this part of the multiverse that's not supposed to exist anymore, but still does, to fight this villain. Because while Franklin is like most likely one of the most powerful, top 10 powerful comic book characters, he kind of beefed it, and they ended up killing Molecule Man. Sorry for the spoilers, but at one point, they had, of course, they brought Thing and Johnny, and then I think it was Old Man Logan was there, Spider-Man, the Lady Thing, Miss Thing, whatever she was.
Sharon Ventura.
Yeah, Sharon Ventura. Miss Thing. Jennifer Walters, Luke Cage, Medusa, all these, these powerhouses. And they brought them together, and they were trying to figure out how to defeat this. And of course, Reed had a plan the entire time. And he says, Franklin, I need you to fight her one more time. And he's like doubting himself. So they're like trying to talk him up. And then Spider-Man comes out of nowhere and says, hey guys, do you mind if I have a crack at it? And they're like, no, absolutely go for it. Because he was part of the Future Foundation for a while and had a, relationship with the kids. And they were like, yeah, please, by all means. And he sits down and he goes, hey, I know that this is a lot of, a lot to put on you and everything, but I'm going to tell you something that was told to me a long time ago. With great power comes, and Thing grabs him by the back of the shirt and lifts him up and says, nope, you're not doing that right now. We're not having that. And, it puts him back down and says, you're not putting that on that kid. And it's like, it was a really cool moment because, then Thing just is like, hey man, we're family. Our family, when we get knocked down, we get back up and we keep trying. He said the good thing is you got your entire family behind you, and he's like, yeah, we're gonna go fight them, kind of a moment. And so it was really funny because while it works for a lot of people, Thing was like, no, not my kid, not my calls him Uncle Ben, not my little nephew, my little buddy. So it was really funny. But I love Spider-Man, I love X-Men, I love all these characters, and the problems and the things that they face every day, and the actual personalities that they had. They're constantly at odds with one another or with things in their life. So Stan not only helped create these characters, but they breathed life into these drawings, gave them personalities, gave them depth, in my opinion. So that meant a lot to me as I got older and started to understand more of what I was reading and diving in a little more and actually reading that as literature and not just a quote unquote funny book. So does anybody have anything that they anything they want to share their thoughts about Stan Lee as we continue?
I wish, this is going to sound kind of silly, but I really wish they had established before he had died, like for sure, like in one of the Guardians movies or the last Avengers, that Stan Lee was in fact the Beyonder.
Yeah, that would have been kind of cool.
I heard in an episode of Comic Book Men podcast, he got referred to as the cool Walt Disney. And they were kind of like, "Oh, can you really say that?" But it makes so much sense because I don't know about you guys, but we're all we're all different age brackets, and I got to go see Disney movies in theaters because it was what you took a 6-year-old to.
Yeah.
You could take him, I saw The Lion King in the summer of 1994 like 5 times because I wasn't allowed to see Speed. So I was pretty much out on Disney when I was like 7 or 8. And, but it made sense. Like Walt Disney created, Mickey and Minnie and Donald and Goofy and all this stuff. But Stan Lee created Spider-Man and the Hulk and Thor and the Fantastic Four. And yeah, that's a lot cooler than a stupid mouse with a high-pitched voice.
Well, I mean, giving Disney his due, I mean, he created amazing characters that, I mean, kids still love today. But that's just it. Kids love those characters. After a while, you kind of outgrow them. I've not outgrown any of these characters that Stan Lee has created.
Oh, I don't know. Because I'll tell you what, we had Disney passes up until we had to start paying for Jonas to go to preschool. And when I tell you there are like adults shoving kids out of the way to get into Magic Kingdom, and there's a lot of childless adults with Disney passes that go there often. I mean, some of it's to go to Epcot to get drunk, but there's definitely a lot of it. There's definitely a lot of it that is motivated by
those people are weird and wrong.
A lot of it is motivated by the fact that Disney stays with certain adults forever. I would say that's an apt comparison between Stan Lee and Walt Disney. Absolutely. Did they both hate Jews?
Oh no!
Oh my gosh, Stan Lee was Jewish.
That matters not. No. If you know anything about the Jewish culture, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say Stan Lee is like the cooler Walt Disney, but without the anti-Semitism.
There we go.
Or the cryogenic freezing. But to what I was saying was like, if you're a normal, high-functioning human being, you kind of outgrow Disney.
What
the fuck, dude?
Well, let's not pass judgment upon those who enjoy theme parks, okay?
It's not the theme park. I'm talking about
the characters.
Mark, do you regularly watch Disney cartoons like you read comic books?
I'm also not a 40-year-old girl. Get some of them on the show. Okay, and any number of them, or a vast, and again, this is gonna sound like I'm making a joke. I swear to God, I'm not. Or a vast quantity of the homosexual community, all adults, all love Disney. And I'm not just making that up. They had to make fucking gay days at Magic Kingdom for that reason.
Good night, folks.
Someone back me up.
The show has ended.
Al, you know what I'm talking about.
Don't you bring him into this.
Put our guest on the most, yeah, there you go.
He is innocent.
He was starting to agree with me before we all cut him off. Go ahead, Al. Say your piece.
No, I was going to say that, yes, that's true. Their gay days exist at Walt Disney World. They do have that.
Yeah, I realize that. It happens at King's Dominion and King's Island, too.
Yeah, a lot of places do.
Okay.
Moving on. I
was agreeing with him on that part. That was a fact.
I don't know what to do with my hands.
You're just wringing them. Oh God.
Here's the thing. We're comparing.
Every time I do a show with Mark. Oh God.
That's why God invented editing.
There you go.
Not these shows.
Oh boy. Yeah.
These show up raw and wriggly.
Yeah. It's
we're comparing Marvel characters to Disney characters, and the thing is that at this point in time, they're pretty much all the same. They are Marvel characters are now Disney characters. Well, if it, I know we're talking about Stan Lee here, but if it wasn't for Disney coming in, it's a very good possibility that the popularity of these characters would not have ballooned to where they are. Regardless, that's not taking anything away from the creation of the characters themselves. Disney. Huh?
I don't know, because before Disney got a hold of these properties, it was Marvel Studios. Marvel Studios was responsible for Iron Man, which kicked off all of the Marvel movies.
Okay.
And that kicked off the popularity of these characters once again.
Yeah, and let's just for the record say that Disney sucks.
Well, Disney doesn't suck so much.
Yes,
Pat.
it does.
All right, so Disney doesn't suck for me, Pat. I still enjoy going to Disney World.
Only Disney property I still have any interest in is Lizzie McGuire.
Yeah, buddy.
That's for a different reason. You sick little puppy.
Oh, that's innocent puppy love right there. I can tell.
Thank you, Jesse. I always liked you.
She is quite incredible, though. So I forgot where I was going with this. So
Your point was that people outgrow Disney, which is wrong, but you never outgrow Stan Lee's Marvel characters. And I would tell you, I don't think people outgrow either one. They are deeply embedded in the American mythology.
I like it.
All right, Mark. I'm just going to say it. You're right. I'll concede.
Okay.
All right. So let's finish up. Let's wrap up a little bit because this is going down a dark path that I'm afraid won't be able to salvage. Does anybody have any final thoughts that they want to share about anything? You know, the impact that Stan Lee had on their lives, or favorite works, or anything like that. We'll start with Mark.
Oof. I mean, look, the fact that he in part gave us the Marvel comic book universe, it's been a big part of, even before I got involved with this podcast and got back into reading comic books again, it was a big part of my character and my own personal culture. I mean, for God's sakes, before my son was ever born, I had I decorated his entire room in Marvel stuff. Like, it was literally like, you're having a boy, great, ran home, decorated the entire room in Marvel stuff. No. By contrast, you're having a girl, the room is pink, and walked out of the room again. My son's got I think one of my wife's teacher friends painted a little baby Hulk picture and put Jonas's name on there, stuff like that. My wife asked me, she was just like, what is it with comic books and comic book characters that you're so obsessed with? Because even without reading the actual comic books, these still play a major role. Comparing myself to the Hulk, is sort of a gag. Watching all of these movies and TV shows. I mean, 90% of the media I consume has to do with a comic book character of some kind. It's as I wasn't saying it to be obstinate, I really do believe that comic books play an integral role in American mythology. We don't have the gods; we have comic book characters. There's ethics and morals and all of these teachings embedded in these stories that it's hard to divorce yourself from. But not only that, it's the ultimate escapism. Somebody from, it's the second time I'm going to reference them tonight, but the Red Letter Media guys, Rich Evans, mentioned something about Star Wars being an incredibly small universe. There's not a whole lot you can do with it outside of TIE fighters, AT-ATs, and lightsabers. And to a degree, I agree with that. Whereas the Marvel universe, and they made the same point, goes on ad infinitum. It's you can get into it at any point, and it can go anywhere, and it's as big as it's as big as your imagination will allow it to be. And there's something in it for everybody. Not everybody's into comic books, but everyone can be potentially. Whereas some of the other things in the world, whether it's Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or whatever, could be a bit limiting, for people. Whereas I don't think the Marvel universe is limiting in any way. I think there's something in it for everybody. So and it takes a rare personality indeed, like someone like Stan Lee, to bring that. Because I mean, what we're talking about here, if you reduce it to brass tacks, is a comic book company. There's lots of comic book companies out there, but none of them have had the cultural impact outside of maybe DC as the Marvel universe. So I think that's what makes Stan Lee special.
Yeah, even though they've had the cultural impact, I don't think they've had anywhere near the cultural impact that Marvel's had.
I agree.
So, all right, Jesse, what about you?
Well, I don't think that I'm going to be able to really kind of put let's just put it this way. There's going to be 1,000 other podcasters out there, 1,000 other bloggers, and 1,000 other authors that are going to write something that is going to probably put Stan Lee's accomplishments in a much better and understandable understandable way than I would. As you can tell, I'm stumbling already all over my words. But let me just say this, and how this really personally affected me the day that I found out he had passed. So Stan Lee has been around 95 years, been a part of my life since, since I could remember reading comics. So that's over 30 years. And I find out that he passes that Monday, and we came really close to canceling source material because of what happened. But we sallied forth, and we knew that we were going to be doing this show tonight in order to definitely try to do our best to pay tribute to him. So after I had found out about that, it was a holiday, so I was at home. And I went upstairs and I had to make a decision. And the decision was, do I tell my kids? So I tell my kids that, this man has passed away. Now, I have a son who's 4 years old, and I have another son who's 8. And you may think to yourself, well, these kids are too young to even know who the hell Stan Lee is. And that actually is not the case.
Yeah.
I have, if any of you guys have ever played the Marvel Lego games, one of the things that you can do is you can rescue Stan in peril. Okay, Stan Lee is help. You hear him off the side, and in that classic Stan Lee voice that'll never fade in my mind.
Yeah.
And I made the decision that day. I said, it's probably more dramatic for me than it ever was for my kids, but I had to explain to them, hey, Stan Lee passed away, because I know at some point they're going to ask about Stan Lee, and especially with the Marvel cameos. Whenever we watch a movie together, a Marvel movie, and Stan Lee makes a cameo, hey, there's Stan Lee, and Colton, 5 years old. Did I say he was 4? He's 5. He had a birthday recently. You can't fault me for that. But my I got 3 kids. It's hard to keep track.
I know who they are, really.
I do. I swear. I think it's Colt. But no, Colt would see him, and he knew exactly who Stan Lee was. 5 years old. That's way more than what I had at 5 years. I had no idea who the man was. So to say that this man was a pop culture icon, a comic book icon, is just scratching the surface. There's so much more to this man than anybody, I think, is going to have the chance to really talk about within an hour to an hour and a half. So I advise anybody out there to go find as much material as you can to learn about this guy, because every single bit of his creations and his effort that he put toward the comic book business is something that will be unparalleled. Nothing, I really do not think anybody else is going to touch what this man has brought to us when it comes to entertainment. So
before anyone, I'm sorry, Jesse.
No, go ahead, man.
But before anyone goes again, I wanted to quickly add something. Unfortunately, we've had to do a lot of these for the past couple of years. We've done these remembering shows, whether it be wrestlers like Vader or Bruno Sammartino, to Carrie Fisher, to Prince, to Bowie. One of the things that bears repeating, and because we've said it on these other shows, is we're all between the ages of about I'm going to be 43 in June, so you figure I'm the old man of the podcast here, and I think you guys are all in your 30s.
Actually, right? I beat you.
Oh, you're older than me?
I turned 43 in September.
You old fucker.
Mark doesn't get to say that to anybody on podcast.
You old bastard. All right,
Shut up, kid, and get off my lawn.
So us 40 and 30 years, I don't think there's anyone here younger than 30. But we're all at an age now where the people we grew up with that we thought would never die. I mean, who thought Princess Leia was going to pass away in your lifetime, right? Are starting to die. And because occasionally you get somebody and you're just like, oh, well, and it's not like Stan Lee died in a fucking tragic car accident or anything. The man was in his 90s. Yeah. Medicine's come far, but not far enough that you're going to get that many people live past. Many people even live into the 90s, let alone past the 90s. So, no shame in his game the way he dies. But, some of these other folks, you hear about, and it's like, when it's like an Abe Vigoda or somebody from like Dad's generation, Burgess Meredith, you're like, okay, well, you were old when I was fucking watching the Rocky movie. So, good on you, good life. But, when you hear about some of these younger folks who are starting to pass, it's like, wow, this is a mark that we're getting older, that this generation is now starting to pass. And, it's a little depressing, and it's just like, I kind of brace for what's the next remembering ... show we're going to have to do on this podcast? Like, what cultural icon is going to slip and fall on a banana peel and fucking die? Somebody from Metallica. I'm waiting for that show to happen. Lars Ulrich, starts yelling about
that would be
at an escalator. It was like remembering Lars, that sort of thing. So I just
always count on Mark Radlish. You can count on Mark Radlish to bring a little ray of sunshine to the show.
Was that Pat?
Yeah, I hate Lars Ulrich. I hate Metallica for the most part, but especially Lars. What a dickbag.
You're welcome. All right, I'll throw it to Pat now. I just wanted to put that out there and contextualize things.
I mean, we can talk all day and all night about how Stan Lee influenced the world of pop culture as a whole, but I'll talk a little bit just about personalizing it. For most of you who've listened to these podcasts that I've been on here and on Mark's Network and what have you, some of you've heard the twisted tales of Pat's childhood. So there was a ray of sunshine in that childhood, though, and a lot of that is just because of Stan Lee creating these characters who, for 22 pages at a time, could just take my mind off of whatever was not going well or good and let me escape into this fantasy world. And then beyond that, give me examples of goodness that I didn't necessarily see in my little bubble world at the time that I could see embodied in other characters, and teach me lessons I didn't necessarily see either, like tolerance or understanding, not judging a book by its cover, looking into situations deeper, controlling my rage and not lashing out at the world around me. All these things are things that I got just from reading the creations of Stan Lee, and a lot of it being the reprints of the original runs of books he had with Jack Kirby from the 60s, with the Steve Ditko Spider-Man run, the Romita Spider-Man run. Just those things I can really personalize and understand just how much good they did me at a time when I really needed it. And that having this man gone, it's one of those things where, yeah, it's going to affect the world, sure, but it's almost one of those things where I'm not sure if it's going to affect the world more than it affects me personally. And just, I know how great he was. I know how great Jack Kirby was. To me, they're always going to be like Robert Plant and Jimmy Page, in that they were always capable of great stuff on their own, but nothing beats them when they're together.
Very good. I agree. Al.
So, because we're talking about it, Stanley has passed away, and the man is gone. And I was thinking about it, like what Mark was saying about, like, for instance, Abe Vigoda and Burgess Meredith. And the further away you get from their time, the less anyone's going to know who they are or remember them. But I'm having to wonder, I mean, Stan's one of the few people I wonder, how much will that happen to? I mean, he's one of the few people who's been able, I think, if as much as possible, has been able to make himself as much of a myth as, like, I don't know, maybe the last one might have been Elvis, where people still know and talk about Elvis, even though they might never even heard of anything about Elvis, but they know the name. And I just have to wonder, is Stan Lee, I think he's the next person who I think has the possibility of being a myth himself, so to speak. That he'll live on for years because people will still know who Stan Lee is. Even if they don't know what he did. He'll still exist for, like, people like in a generation or two from now. They'll still know who Stan Lee was in some way, shape, or form.
Wow.
More than a lot of other people.
Hey, isn't he that old fucker that shows up in all those Marvel movies?
Even if it's that, it's like, I think he's the one who, like, one of the few people who, like, will live on like that. And that's kind of cool, because I think if anyone could have done that, it was Stan. He'll probably outlive all of us, so to speak.
Yeah, that's the truth. Well, there's nothing I could say that would be better than what you all have said, and it's a personal thing to me because, like I said, this man was a big part of my childhood, and he introduced all the cartoons that I watched, and created all the characters that I love, and it's just one of those things where me personally, it hit kind of hard because I was like, it's like, oh my gosh, he's an icon that I, never realized would pass away one day, and he's gone. So he has left quite the legacy behind, and that's going to, like you said, Al, he's probably going to live forever because of that. So That's our show, remembering Stan Lee. We all have fond memories of what he's created and left behind for people, generations to come to enjoy and to love and to discover, on their own. So, or if you're a Mark's child, be forced upon you.
You mean good parenting? Right.
Right. I can't argue with that at all. So
it's like, hey, you're going to have a boy. Here is the image you're going to see on your walls for the rest of your life. Okay? Nothing but superheroes, son.
It's my room until he's old enough to decorate it himself.
Oh, damn.
We're going to go into plugs. Let's see. Pat, tell us what... well, actually, I'm sorry, Pat, I don't mean to interrupt, but we're going to go with the special guest. We're going to go... Al, tell us what you got going on, my friend.
The main place you can find me is Resurrections and Adam Warlock and Thanos podcast, which is, about, Adam Warlock and Thanos. I don't hide what it's about. It's all on Front Street.
Thought it was about Power Pack.
Can we do a Power Pack podcast to lose all our viewers?
There actually is one, and it's awesome.
Oh, boy.
I just did a crossover with them. They're unpacking the Power Pack. I love that series. But Resurrections, AdamWarlock.tumblr.com, or pretty much every single pod type thing you can find. Just type in Adam Warlock, and we pop up.
Nice. Pat.
So apparently I'm going to be doing an episode of TV Party on the Radulich Broadcasting Network, highlighting this season's Elseworlds crossover between the Flash, Supergirl, Arrow, and I don't know if Legends of Tomorrow is involved in that.
No, it's just Supergirl, Arrow, and Flash.
Oh, good. That's one less show I have to watch then. I make no bones about this. I am doing this solely because John Wesley Shipp, the Flash of my childhood, will be suiting up as the Flash once again.
Anything else?
No, I'm good.
Hey, when are you recording another Casual Heroes podcast, Pat?
When is the next Olympics?
Hey, I got Gavin to record with us there last week, so I know he can do it.
Yeah,
there was a small part of me that was, was like,
oh. No, it's not. I'm saying it's not Gavin's fault.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's what
there was a small part of me that when the Casual Heroes got back together and started recording, I was like, they've moved on without me, and then I got over it quickly enough. I was like, you know what, they're better off, and I'm better off. And then a few minutes after that, I realized, they're only going to record maybe once every 3 months. I'm really not missing anything. And lo and behold.
Yeah, that would be sadly accurate if we recorded once every 3 months and not twice in a span of 9 months.
Once every appearance of Haley's Comet.
I mean, how many shows have y'all done so far?
2.
When did you all come back?
That long ago.
Nice.
We actually
shows ago.
I should say that we did 3. However, one is apparently not suitable for air.
Oh, geez. I don't know how in the world.
Honestly, he's told me what it's about. If it had been on one of my podcasts, I'd have aired it with no problem.
All I was doing was illustrating that how if you're a bad man and do one really terrible thing, a lot of good things you do are not going to ever be looked at. Like the Autobahn or the technology that invented Porsche.
But he killed a lot of Jews, so they're not allowed to talk about it for some strange reason.
I was going to let you connect the dots on who I was talking about.
Controversial.
Patrick, no.
I'm not saying he was a good guy or what he did was good. I'm just saying that because he did this monstrous thing, the good stuff that he did do is overlooked.
So are we going to do the show right now? Are we going to do it right now?
Right now?
We have to.
Then we need Jed to come on, and then the other part of that show was apparently their rendition of their 2-man rendition of Boogie Nights.
Oh my
gosh! Do you think the bass is taken away from my vocals?
Can we?
Look, I don't know if there's a form I didn't sign or something that wasn't signed correctly. Just give me the papers and I'll sign them.
Al hasn't heard your Jim Cornette either.
No, he hasn't.
Oh boy, which one do we want to go with?
Angry Jim.
I turn on the goddamn fucking Survivor Series, goddamn, and I see this fucking cunt with the blood all over her face. She ain't selling a goddamn thing, and I'm looking at, where the fuck is the audience on this goddamn shit? Give me a fucking cheeseburger, extra cheese, motherfucker.
I hope Al is a wrestling fan. Do you know who Jim Cornette is?
It sounds familiar. I have watched some wrestling, but if it's someone in the last 10 years, then no clue.
Okay.
Lucky
we're
for
talking
you,
older
Jim
than that.
Cornette was 30 years ago.
Oh, good.
Do you remember
Tennis racket.
Do you remember the guy with the tennis racket that used to come out with Yokozuna?
Oh, that guy.
Yeah, apparently he's done more than walk the fat Samoans out to the ring. He's apparently used to be a big deal in wrestling, and now he has his own podcast where he yells at people.
Oh God.
And I think that's as good as any to do my plugs. How about that?
Yeah, that's a smooth segue.
Yeah, buddy, smooth.
Just
like
go
butter.
ahead with your plugs.
Thank you.
Give me the keys to the goddamn safe in the fucking floor.
So you can hear more of that this December as Pat and I do a TV party tonight for Elseworlds, the CW DC Comics crossover that will be airing starting, I believe, with Supergirl or whatever the fuck order they're doing this in. It's the 9th, the 10th, and the 11th of December.
Wait, catch 22. What is that? Some kind of industry jargon?
9th, 10th, and 11th of December is when the shows are airing. We'll be talking about it, Pat and I, on December 18th. Again, I don't
give me the tapes. I bring them to the record company. We get the contract. Then we pay you. Have you heard the tapes? They're that good.
And you can hear more of that on the Rattledge Broadcasting Network. November brought a lot of fine shows. We did a TV party for The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, TV party for Voltron. We reviewed The Grinch, which then got into an entire subtopic of of the life and times of single moms. Believe it or not, you have to listen to the show.
I can talk about what single moms do.
I'll bet you could, sir. We did a TV party tonight for our World War with our representative of our Canadian audience, Andrew Graham. We did reviews for Fantastic Beasts for those of you that are awake through the movie, and we did a Damn You Hollywood review for Robin Hood, Metal Hammer of Doom. We woke the sleeping dragon with Sick of It All. We reviewed Hoobastank, and
you host a show about metal, right?
Yes, sir. This was our.
Why were you talking about Hoobastank?
Hoobastank, because that was our turkey episode.
Right.
We review a terrible album once a year, night before Thanksgiving. It's a tradition.
Yeah, well, my wife's down there with a giant ass in her cock.
What is happening? Are you broke that?
And you can hear more of that on the Rattledge Broadcasting Network. I'm good with plugs, thanks.
Jesse, go. Hurry.
Oh, my gosh.
Can anyone feel Ronnie's aneurysm growing?
This is the second one. First one's already happened.
Chocolate love, 100%.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you can go give the Source Material podcast a listen there. It's a comic book podcast right here on the Rattledge in Broadcasting Network. Hey, I actually have a episode that came out 2 years ago, and I believe I shared it on our feed, where me and Benjamin J. Colon, the fantastic artist that has had the opportunity to get on our shows and was drawing title cards for Long Road to Ruin back when that was a thing. So he shared some stories about meeting Stan Lee at some of the cons that he usually frequents, and he's a vendor himself, a comic creator himself, and it was a great discussion because I think he had like 2 or 3 instances where he had the chance to meet Stan Lee, and then Stan Lee, my goodness, dude he was doing signings 2 years ago at 90, over 90 years old.
Well, I tell you, the funny thing is the more of these signings I go to, the more people I meet who read my works. And I just can't believe they're still this popular.
Stan Lee, ladies and gentlemen, Stan Lee.
Was that Stan Lee or Vince Russo?
Yeah. Bro, let me tell you about this swerve I got.
Bro! Speaking of bros.
When the Fantastic Four get the Doomstat, and all of a sudden Sue Richards is going to throw Doom the ultimate nullifier, bro.
That's a really good Russo, too. I mean,
it's great.
I've never been more impressed with what you do, Pat, than right now.
So, yeah, speaking of bros, you can check out Hawkeye, My Life as a Weapon, which is going to be dropping here. Boy, whenever this show airs, it's probably going to be after it sometime. Keep an eye out. I know it's going to be Monday.
Or before it, or during it.
Monday, the 26th of November. That show featuring myself, Mark Radlich, Ronnie Adams, and Al Sedano from Resurrections, an Adam Warlock and Thanos podcast. So, other than that,
has Al heard me and Pat go off about Thanos?
Al has heard enough tonight. There's a line that's been crossed an hour ago.
I heard you do a show about Thanos. You should hear Pat and I talk about Thanos so lovingly.
He has. That is the one show that was interesting. At least caught his eye, and he listened to.
Oh God, he listened to that show.
Didn't you call him like one of you called him like a big child, like a teenager or something? I think an angry teen.
Yes.
Yeah, he is.
Things. Okay.
He is an angry teen. He's an angry, cranky teen. That's why he does what he does. If you look at it like that, everything makes sense.
Oh, okay.
He never got past that maturity-wise.
Al, I have to ask: is it exclusively Thanos and Warlock, or is it more like Starlin Cosmic stuff that you do?
Well, I mean, we mostly do the Adam Warlock Thanos issues, but I do branch out here and there to other stuff.
Like some Marvel and...
Oh, yeah, we did all the issues of Marvel that had Thanos anyway, so there's 10 issues of Marvel and Captain Marvel in there.
Sir, I'm going to have to download your shows.
All right, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I have been educated. I mentioned that on the Source Material podcast. I've learned a lot listening to some of the recent. Actually, I think I caught up on everything at least I could out there. So, what do you got? Like 2 years? Was there 2 years? No, you have more content than that. But I know I caught up on the last 2 years.
4 years, I think I've been doing it now.
Okay. So, but yeah, you can check that out. Hey, I'm done with plugs, Ronnie Adams. Just everybody go give the Radulich and Broadcasting Network Facebook page a like and stay up on top of all the great podcasts that we have to offer. Ronnie Adams, I turn it over to you, sir.
I just like how Al was so nice. He's like, yeah, I'm okay with that. But what if it went sideways? And he's like, no, sir, you're not allowed to download the shows because I heard you said about Thanos.
I heard your stupid Infinity Gauntlet commentary. Fuck you and the horse you rode in on.
I just can't help but believe there's something wonderful underneath those jeans just waiting to come out.
This is random. I mean, he's on the IMDb page right now. That's what's going on. He's reading quotes.
I'm seriously concerned about Pat's well-being. Do you smell burnt toast? Are you having a stroke?
Are you tasting red, sir? Do you taste red?
All right.
Hey, Ronnie,
you ever see Star Wars?
Don't tell me what's in the show.
In the show.
End the show.
People tell me I look like that guy Han Solo.
One more.
Do you work out at Vince's? Oh, no, I would have seen you there.
All right. Thank you so much for listening. If you still are, God bless you.
What's wrong with you?
That would be our show. Please go like, subscribe, follow, whatever else you can do on social media. Huh?
What do you bench?
just hurry. Push through.
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, the whole nine. We're on iTunes, TuneIn. Shut up. iTunes, TuneIn, iHeart, the whole run.
Check out Screaming Boy's Tinder page.
Shut up, Mark.
Apparently, watch Boogie Nights.
Shut up. All of you, except for Al, please come back. Have a good night. That's the end of the show. I don't have anything else to say.
Holiday your heart out at OldNavy.com with jeans on sale for 1 day only today. That's right, Old Navy jeans are just $10 for adults and $8 for kids and toddlers. Online only at OldNavy.com. Valid 11/26, select styles only.